All right, good morning, everybody. Matt Braden here from the GPAR team. So happy to see so many faces here with us for our home inspection workshop. But before we get into that, I want to look ahead to next week. We're going to have 2 coffee talks. One is going to be on Monday, and that's going to be with NAR President Charlie Oppler. He's going to join Stephanie there for an update for all of us about what's going on with the National Association as they head into the home stretch of Charlie's time as president and leading into the NAR meetings, which will be in 2 weeks' time out in San Diego. Fast forwarding to Thursday, we're going to have Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney join us. So we hope you'll also join us. We'll have coffee talk there with the mayor, and Stephanie's going to talk about different things that are impacting the real estate industry through City Hall and what is on the horizon with public safety, home affordability, and a whole host of other things. So we hope to see you there on that session. We'll be sending out promotion either later this afternoon or sometime tomorrow morning on both of those coffee talks. So we hope you'll join us for those with President Stephanie. Now let's get into today. As I said, you know what you're here for. We're here for the home inspection, scary stories, scary stuff. Workshop with Bill Dare from Spotlight Home Inspection LLC. This is the 4th time Bill has joined us in the last year or so, and these are great sessions. Bill gives us real boots on the ground perspective and gives nuggets for all of you to be better at your jobs, to help your clients, and also to better understand, hey, what's going on with a house? I think back to the stucco, I can't remember the word, Bill, stucco-opolis, whatever we called it. Something with apocalypse.
Yeah,
there we go. Like that was just like tremendous, right? Because we saw it happen in these other markets, and it was like slowly creeping into where we are, becoming more prevalent. And it's a real issue that comes up with houses using that kind of product. So again, good nuggets to help you guys be better at your job, to help your clients out, and also to avoid any scary stories and make them seem much more manageable. So Bill is an expert. He when I say expert, he's really an expert. He goes into court and serves as an expert witness. He is a force within the home construction industry. I could go on and on about Bill, but he's the guy to go ahead and talk with us and share with us his vantage point and how to help you guys out. So with that, Bill, the floor is yours. Welcome, Bill.
wow, thank you, Matt. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm excited to be involved in this industry. It's been a passion of mine since I was a kid. Been in real estate my entire adult life at some level or another. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you. For those of you that got dressed enough to turn on your camera, thanks. For those of you that didn't, I'm glad you're comfortable. We're going to talk a lot about different aspects of home inspections today. So I thought I'd just do a PowerPoint because it seemed to be simpler, and then you don't have to look at my ugly mug this entire time. So I'm going to try to put this up here. I think I'm going to be successful. And you should be seeing.
Bingo.
Yep. Okay, good. So again, I'm Bill Dare from Spotlight Home Inspection. Getting to know me a little bit, I've been in real estate, like I said, my entire adult life. I've flipped dozens of homes, most of which I did all the construction work myself or with a little help from some friends. I've owned nearly 100 apartments, which I managed and remodeled for 30 plus years. I started Spotlight about 20 years ago, and I really do honestly am passionate about the real estate industry. I think this is the greatest industry to be in. I don't know that I could ever be a real estate agent. I'm not that patient. I can't put up with people for that long. So I can only deal with them for about 3 or 4 hours, which fortunately for me is about how long a home inspection takes. But I admire real estate agents for their patience to trek people all around, show them 30 or 40 houses before they finally make a decision. Now in today's market, that's unheard of. You're lucky to get to see 2 or 3 houses before you have to throw your dice on the table. That's a little bit about me. At the bottom, you'll see the office number and the email. If you email that email, I get the email too, as well as the girls in the office. So I see almost everything. So if you've got a question or problem, feel free to email. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So taking a freight out of home inspections, I think that the industry right now is really in flux with, waiving inspections. We're going to talk about some of the risk factors. I'm going to show you some documents from PAR later on about that. I do believe we're going to get, I hope anyway, because this is my industry, we're going to get back to a sense of normal, in the spring at least, hopefully a little sooner than that. But the home inspection industry causes a lot of different people anxiety in a bunch of different ways. So we're going to talk a little about what a home inspection is. What are some of the scariest problems we're going to see at a home inspection, or you're going to see with us? And we've got a bunch of pictures of that kind of thing. We'll talk about prioritizing the problems in the house. We're going to talk about great inspectors, not so great ones, and what does the age of a home have to do with it, because that plays a critical role in how we look at a house, how we think about a house, and obviously how much you pay for the inspection. Strategies to keep your client from being frightened or getting cold feet or walking off the job. I tell my guys that I expect those people to go to closing all the time. I don't really expect them to terminate the transaction. We're going to try to get you and your client to the closing table. We're going to talk a little bit about strategies to keep that from happening, especially if you've got an inspector that's off the rails and you feel that they're not being fair to your house or your client. And then some PAR documents on the importance of inspections. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. We're going to jump right in here. A home inspection is basically looking for what the state of Pennsylvania calls a material defect. And that's a critical word. Your inspection report should include that word, because that is what the home inspection is designed to do. It's to look for things that are expensive to fix or puts the occupants at unreasonable risk. Unfortunately, these are not real clear guidelines. They are fuzzy, they're lawyer words. So we have to kind of calibrate them for the client, and they are calibrated in some level in my company based on the cost of the house. So someone buying a $175,000 house is going to be a lot more concerned about a $1,500 problem than somebody buying a $6.2 million house. So that scale, in my opinion, starts at about $1,000 on a low-end house and goes up to maybe many thousands of dollars on a very expensive house. But for the average house, let's say it's $1,000 to $2,000. Now, this is my personal criteria. It doesn't come from anywhere because, again, the state law does not specifically state a dollar amount, and it does not specifically state a percentage, which I think kind of it should be a percentage thing. So this is the guideline that we use. So if we see a problem in a house and it's going to cost $500 to fix it, obviously we're going to point it out. Obviously it's going to be in a report. We're going to discuss it on site, but it's not a material defect in my humble opinion, because it's not negatively impacting the value of the house. It's simply something that's not right. The day they build a perfect house, I will buy it. They haven't built one yet. They're not going to build one. They don't have them. They don't exist. And if it's perfect, the least perfect house on the planet is probably mine. So the notion of a perfect house doesn't exist. So we have to calibrate that for the client. We have to let the client know that not everything that's wrong with the house is open for discussion necessarily based on the PA home inspection law. Now, obviously they're in the driver's seat, they're writing the check, they can do anything they want. They can complain about anything they want, they can ask for anything they want. But your inspector should be helping you to manage those expectations of the client by kind of putting these brackets in here and saying that the home inspection is here to help you understand what it is you're buying. And it's here to help you to perhaps negotiate some things, but those things are supposed to be, according to the state, a material defect. Now, safety things are in a separate category. I'm pretty strict on safety. If there's a safety problem in a house, I'm going to generally call it a material defect, because I don't care if it costs $100 to fix it or it costs $10,000 to fix it. Safety is something that we're going to pretty much all the time say is something we're going to need to address. So those two things are what the state has put out there in the home inspection law. You can look it up. It's there, Act 114. It's a really good law. I've compared it to, I used to sit on a national board for home inspectors. So we've seen the other laws in the other states. And I think it's really well written. It requires the home inspector to not work on the house for 12 months after they inspect it. So I'm not allowed to run in there and find all kinds of problems with the house and then run back with my ladder and say, I'm going to fix all this stuff for you. It requires the home inspector to be impartial. And that's what you want. You want somebody that comes there completely impartial. So to me, a home inspection is a lot about a connection. We're going to talk about the connection with the client in a minute here, but it's so much more than just the house. You've got to set your expectations for the client. Remember, you've been on maybe 20, 30, 100, 500, some agents have been on as many home inspections as I've been on. So you know what to expect from a good home inspector, but the client may be on their first or second home inspection. They may have never seen one before. So the home inspector, because we were an impartial body and nobody can accuse us of trying to get the deal to go to close for our fee, because we get paid either way, we need to set those expectations for the client. So the home inspector should be stating, you know, what it is we're doing, what it is we're not doing. So we're going to inspect the readily available components in the property. So I'm not going to be cleaning out the closet so that I can get behind it to open something up. There's a limit to what a home inspector can do. I can't cut a hole in the wall. I do think home inspectors, and we do, should open up the electric panel, should open up the front of the heater, although that is not required. But I think those are important places to look. So removing covers is important. So opening things up is good. Cutting through things, damaging something is not good. It's not something that we're supposed to do. Obviously, we prefer if the listing agent or the seller gave us accessible access to things. Like, so when we go into a house and there's, you know, 42 boxes in front of the heater, that's a bit annoying. I have to disclaim that unless there's, you know, 1 or 2 boxes, sure, we're going to move them out of the way so we can do our job. As I said, the inspector should set those expectations, and the inspection truly should be much more about educating the client than telling you what's wrong with the house. Obviously, we have a job to do. Obviously, we need to find the problems in the house and report them accurately. But we should also be doing what my wife used to call the sandwich method. When she used to tell me bad things about myself, she would say, Bill, you're a great guy, but you're not so great here, but I really love you. And so you put the stuff you don't really like in the middle. And that's kind of what we're doing as a home inspection. We're always going to have something that we're going to have to tell the client that's not going to be pleasant. But when I see something good about a house, I want to talk about it. I want to tell the client, this is great because this is not in every house, or this is great about this particular house, because eventually when I get around to the stuff they don't like, it helps soften the blow a little bit. So a good home inspection should really be an education about the property that they're buying. I think we're going to talk about questions from the buyer in a second here. What are some of the scariest problems that we see on a home inspection? By far, mold has dominated the landscape, and not, in my humble opinion, rightfully so. I've got a bunch of pictures here of mold problems that we've seen on inspections. I think that if you have a person that's freaked out about mold, you can send them to the EPA's website, epa.gov/mold. The EPA downplays mold a great deal. Yes, it's important. Yes, we need to identify it. Yes, we need to put it in a report. Yes, it probably should be taken care of. But more often than not, I need them to take care of the moisture problem that ultimately caused the mold first before they start going after the mold. EPA says you can clean up mold yourself in most cases with soap and water. And again, if you don't take care of the water problem, it'll just come back because mold's everywhere. You can't get rid of it. It exists everywhere. Now, obviously, we don't want it growing in a house. We're going to show you some pictures of that. But I think mold got into the landscape years ago because the lawyers got a hold of it and figured out there was lots of money attached to it. So now everybody's all wigged out by it. But I think that mold is a very natural occurring thing. We see it in most houses that we inspect. Certainly not everyone, but a very high percentage of the houses that we inspect have at least a little bit of mold here or there. So mold is #1 on the hit list. When I say there's mold in the house, people's eyes get big and they get all worried, and then we have to talk them back from the ledge. Water intrusion in the basement or through the roof is also a big problem, especially in older block constructed homes with the foundations block and that poured concrete. I got to tell you that we've got a picture or two of that. Most water problems in a basement are best handled through grading and drainage, extending the downspouts away from the house, making sure the gutters are clean. We just did a several $million-dollar house down the main line. It was built on top of an old foundation. So that's pretty popular down there because there's some significant tax savings where they buy an old house to keep the foundation, maybe expand it a little bit, and they build on top of it. So the gentleman bought the house. We told him the gutters were full of stuff. And the first if you recall, not that long ago, we had a very huge rainstorm. Then he got some water in his crawl space and was upset about that. I sent a guy out to clean out his gutters for him. And the next rainstorm, which happened about a week and a half later, he got nothing in his basement. So just cleaning your gutters and extending your downspouts is often the cheapest, easiest way to manage moisture intrusion into a basement. My unfortunate experience with basement waterproofing companies, and they are an essential part of what we do, is that they often come in and sell you $20,000 worth of this and that. And I go outside and I look and I'm like, well, you didn't extend the downspouts. We didn't address the real ultimate root cause of this. We just went in and spent a bunch of money downstairs. Does it solve the problem? Yes. But could it have been solved much more economically outside? Probably. But these are all conversations that we can have on the home inspection about these problems when we see them. Structural problems, moving foundation, broken or cut framing. Again, I've got pictures of all these there. Mice, bees, termites. I got a squirrel in one of these pictures and a bat. Electrical issues, knob and tube, outdated wiring, aluminum wiring, plumbing problems. Deck concerns are really big. The deck code got finally amped up a couple of years ago in the building code. So finally now there's guidance for how to build a deck in the building code. So the newer ones are typically somewhat better, but there's some really scary stuff happening on decks. And then roofs are obviously a problem that seems to crop up quite a bit. Ooh. So mold and mildew, we're gonna go over some of these. I gave you the link to the website. I love this website. The problem is there's a lot of companies out there that have really scary websites on mold, and because they're trying to get you, if they can scare you, they can get you to spend money. I like this website because it's not me saying it, it's the federal government. And they're not trying to scare you. They're just trying to give you good information. I will provide this whole show to Matt in a PDF format so he can post it later. I believe that's what he does. And so you can go back and get this anytime. And if you don't get it, just send me an email and I'll send you the link. Again, like I said, first you got to deal with the moisture. If you don't deal with the moisture, the mold's coming back. That's all there is to it. So EPA basically says scrub it with soap and water. We do sometimes recommend Zinsser makes a mold killing primer that's readily available at Home Depot and Lowe's. If you really want to go after it, you can paint it. But generally speaking, dealing with the moisture problem first and then cleaning up the mold is the best thing. Now, if it's in a building product such as drywall or wood trim and stuff like that paneling to the right, generally speaking, we say just get rid of the wood, throw it out. Cleaning that is not typically an option because mold is like an iceberg. What you don't see is much more than what you do see. So on the back side of that, it's probably even worse. This is the back of drywall. The black mold is down at the bottom, but if you look all the way up to the top, you've got mold all the way up to the top of that picture in the back of this drywall. This was a very wet basement. And again, until no sense even touching that drywall until you deal with the moisture problems in the basement. Dehumidification in a house is crucial. We talk about it at every home inspection. It's in every report we've ever produced, recommending a dehumidifier in all basements and crawl spaces. And the lack of that is systemic to the industry. And I don't know why, because I have one running in my house and I've had one running in here for years. I have an old farmhouse and I don't have a mold problem, because I've got dehumidification going on in the basement. So that's on the back of drywall. This is where it's probably the most common. This is an older 1950s house with pine flooring. The green in the picture is likely mold. We didn't test this particular house, so I can't say, I have to say it's a spore-like growth. However, that was probably in the wood when the house was built. It was probably stacked up in a pile somewhere and got wet. And that mold grew on that wood, and then they installed it. Today, we hopefully, I'm going to show you a picture in a minute where they don't follow this, but generally speaking, most contractors will reject wood with mold on it because they don't want to deal with it. And then on the floor joists, we often see it. Most common place we see mold in the house is on the floor joists in the crawl space or basement, or on the subfloor like that, even on newer construction. And again, you go back to the EPA's website, it says scrub it down, clean it up. If you want to paint it with mold killing primer. The EPA doesn't recommend that, but the company that makes the stuff asserts that if you paint over the mold, it encapsulates it. So I'm okay with that. I can live with that. I don't need a mold remediation company to come in and spend $5,000, doing all kinds of fancy stuff. So I'm going to show you a case where I think you do need a mold remediation company, but this is pretty straightforward to me. Underneath the kitchen and bathroom sinks is a real common area for problems with mold because you get a leak in there that nobody figures out. And it kind of, again, if you put moisture someplace, you're going to have mold. This was new construction. We really were very surprised that they put all these trusses up in this new constructed house. This was fairly recently. And we obviously put this in a report. It was a pre-drywall inspection. So we went in there and we tested this house. Those metal plates that hold the trusses together are called gussets. The little fingers on that gusset is less than 1/4 of an inch into the wood. And 1/8 of an inch of this wood was compromised on the surface because of this fungus growing on there. So we cited this whole thing. Now I got to tell you, an engineer came out and said that structurally it was okay. I wasn't okay with it, but I'm not an engineer. I had to acquiesce to the engineer. They did a few things and then closed this up. I wasn't okay with any of that. My client, you know, because of the draconian contracts that new construction builders have, my client had no choice but to buy the house. We just talked about doing ongoing mold testing. The good thing is that mold in an attic does not typically get into the house. Air is moving up and out. The mold in this attic is likely never going to see the inside of the house, but I wouldn't want to be spending $700,000 or $800,000 and have this in my house. It was annoying, but there wasn't a lot we could do with it at that point. This is where I think you need a mold guy. This is pretty extreme. This was a bank owned. I love bank owns. We don't see quite as many of them as we did a few years ago. They, you know, somebody comes in, turns off the power, the sump pump stops working, 1.5 feet of water accumulates in the basement, and then we have this. This is a serious problem. It's black, likely Stachybotrys. Again, I don't really need to test it. It's by the time you get done testing it, you might as well just start dealing with it. But I do think you need a professional. Once you get past about the government says, I think it's 9 or 10 square feet. You know, I think that's a kind of a fuzzy number, but once you get past 10 or 20 square feet, I think you need to bring in a professional to deal with it. And again, don't bother dealing with mold until you deal with the water. So this is a pretty big problem. I don't know if you can see all that. It's all on the ceiling, it's on the walls. It was kind of a mess. Just for the record, I walked into this house without a respirator. We rarely put respirators on. I do think most people can coexist with mold, you know, a reasonable amount of mold without too much trouble. Obviously, if you have, immune deficiencies, you have respiratory problems, you have mold allergies, you're a different person. But generally speaking, mold is not quite as scary as everybody makes it out to be. Although when I went down here, I kind of held my breath a little bit. Water intrusion is always going to be a big problem. Again, like the crawl space to the left, the block foundations are much more prone to it because they're porous. I thought it was humorous that there's a little can of Rid-X there in the middle of the floor trying to deal with, you know, fluid water running onto the floor. But, you know, they did what they could, I suppose. But this was a serious problem in this particular house because it was around this whole perimeter was all poured patios. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity to easily regrade the house away. So some of these problems become significant, and your home inspector should connect those dots for you. When they see moisture, they should start talking about what they saw on the outside, or go back out and look at it with your client. Say, okay, so here's what we have on the outside. I see moisture on the inside. If you see the situation to the right there where the downspout just drops right at the corner of the house, that's ridiculous. To say that we're going to need a basement waterproofing company in that basement before we try putting that, you know, $20 extension on the downspout is ridiculous. We're dropping an inordinate amount of water at that corner. The dirt at the foundation is disturbed. It's called overdig. The reason we try to get a downspout about 3 or 4 feet away from the house is that the soil out there is typically undisturbed and much more highly compacted, so it's not as porous. So the water that we get 3 or 4 feet away from the house is on soil that doesn't let it soak in so readily. So water intrusion into a basement is very common. It's less common in the city where you guys are because, quite frankly, there's just not that many areas for water to absorb into the soil and to get to the basement, but it does exist. We lost a radon monitor years ago, and that's in a city that down in the city at a unit that flooded. So it does happen. But I think more often in the city, it's surface water that's running down a street or something that comes through a vent or a window, not so much through the wall down there. Now in the country, it's where I live, it's much more common like this in this crawl space. Another water problem, I guess not. So structural problems. By their very name, they're concerning, right? We're talking about the structure of the house. And there are serious structural issues that come up on typical home inspections that need to be addressed by professionals. Your home inspector should discuss the possibilities of what the repair may look like. Most home inspectors aren't engineers. They shouldn't be designing the repair necessarily, but every good home inspector has seen these problems again and again and again, and has seen them corrected, and should be able to adequately discuss with your client what they think that the repair process is going to be. So obviously in this picture, the ceiling joist was cut for the recessed lighting. The ceiling joist is considered a structural element, and that's not a good thing. So, but the fix on that is fairly simple. They're going to pack it out. They're going to sister alongside of it. Probably about $500 or $600 for a contractor to go up there and do that. But that your client needs to understand, because if they look at that, they may think that's a $10,000 problem for all they know. So you know, your home inspector should be gauging that for you and helping you with that. See anything missing here? This was a foundation collapse. Ironically, this was one of my apartment buildings. There was an old stone foundation and the whole thing pushed in. We had to come in and underpin the house and support it, dig it out, put in a new foundation. This is a serious structural issue, obviously. And so these things do happen. What I thought was really ironic is the entire back wall of that foundation collapsed, but look how straight that siding is. That house didn't move. It was amazing to me. I was underneath of that, kind of holding an umbrella over my head, hoping it wouldn't come down on my head. But I was totally blown away by the fact that how strong that house was, that it didn't move even a little bit with that whole center side of that foundation missing. Now, by the time you see this, we had some supports in there, but when it first collapsed, it was pretty surprising. So structural problems are a problem. And again, your home inspector, if he sees something, yeah, obviously he's not going to see it like this, but he can see the precursor to this. We knew this was going to happen. We just waited 20 years until it did. But he can talk about, you know, what the theoretical repair process is going to be. That any good home inspector should be involved in the construction industry at some level, at least from a standpoint of understanding what contractors are going to do to take care of this. I believe the end cost on this was about 20 grand. This was a very expensive, huge house. I think this was crawl space number 4, all the way in the back. And that's a structural steel beam that I believe was about 30 feet long, and 2x4s are just not enough. This beam should have been let into that block sitting on the block wall. This was a temporary situation that nobody ever went back and got corrected. This is why your home inspector should get into the crawl space. Not getting into a crawl space that is accessible is a mistake and should not occur. If your home inspector takes a flashlight and looks into a crawl space that they can get into. Now I'm a little bigger than most guys, and you saw that first picture, I still try to get into anyone that I can. Now, if it's full of water, full of rodents, full of something, there's only so much you can do. But if it's accessible, they should be getting back there, because those are the places we find the most problems. You don't find big problems in the bedroom. You find the problems in crawl spaces, basements, attics, places that people don't often go. So that's a pretty big structural problem. I don't believe the fix on that was quite as enormous as it may appear, but that was a problem that needed to be addressed. This is a garage. They wanted to put a garage door opener, so they just cut the main structure and then put a little piece of bracket up there, which isn't enough. This is a broken truss, new construction or newer construction. This is a really common problem. These trusses get manhandled to put in place. They're broken pretty frequently. The repair is not significantly expensive, but it does need to be addressed. So broken trusses are this is a roof truss if this is up in an attic of a house. So structural problems are usually pretty scary. I didn't inspect this building. I happened to be parked there waiting for somebody. I looked at the wall. I'm like, well, that's a pretty cool picture. Let me take that. So that whole thing is rotating out. That is not an easy fix. But the funny thing is that barn is probably 100+ years old. That thing's probably been failing for 50 of those years. So most of the times, things like this kind of had like structural issues with foundations and stuff. Like I said, that collapsed foundation at my apartment building took 20 years. These things happen in slow motion for the most part. This is a really common problem. So you've got the walkout basement with a little staircase. That wall is subject to enormous pressure from freezing frost heave. So what the soil is not sloped away from that wall you see to the right. It's flat. So water lays there, soaks into the wall, and then when it freezes, it's hard to resist freezing soil. It's how they used to split rocks back in the old days. They'd fill them up with water and let it freeze, and the rock would crack. So that's going to push almost no matter what you do. So that's a difficult problem to deal with. There's a safety issue there, which is no handrail. And also drainage issue for me, that's a second swimming pool. That's a swimming pool down there. So we need to watch our drainage on that. So these are things that a home inspector should be obviously discussing with the buyer. Please keep this drain down here clear, you know, slope the soil away. Obviously the wall's got to be fixed. This was a big commercial building we did. It had a truss system in it. Somebody had come in and fixed the truss system. That's what those newer boards are. And it had broken again. This was a serious problem. This roof was in danger of collapse. I took this picture and then got out of there. Pests, aren't they the funnest things? One of my guys, I didn't get a chance to put it in his presentation. One of my guys just had a bat in the basement, which is unusual. Usually you find your bats in the attic. This one happened to be down in the basement. But you know, we run into all kinds of pests. These are termite tubes hanging down from here. Those were some determined termites trying to find someplace else to eat some wood. They're always kind of interesting. They're pretty sneaky sometimes. This was obviously obvious. I don't think I could say that. This was obvious. But a lot of times termites aren't quite so obvious. There's a bat up in an attic I had a few years ago. It's surprising. They'll get into a space about the size of a quarter. They don't need a lot of room to get in someplace. We recently had one with flying squirrels that were getting in. They had eaten through the roof deck at the gutter and had gotten into the soffits. So pests are kind of a pest. They're a pain. That was a squirrel we found. What I don't understand is you're living in this house. This has been gone for a while now. This thing was basically dehydrated. That had to smell terrible for a long time. Electrical issues. What's wrong with knob and tube? Well, I get that question pretty frequently because everybody's like, well, it's been there 100 years. And well, this is what's wrong with knob and tube. This was a job we did a number of years ago. And there was a time I counted all these connections. I don't remember how many there is. So like 10 or 15 different wires were tied into the knob and tube just by twisting. Like you see the newer wires coming up off the ceiling being connected to it. Knob and tube has run its course. I've been in this business for 20 some years. There was a day early on in the business where I thought knob and tube could probably coexist for a while if it was just on lights and stuff. I'm pretty much done with that. If we see knob and tube, it's gotta go. It's just the insulation has now gotten to the point where I rarely see it. The insulation's any good. It's all deteriorated. And again, what I don't know is what was done to it for the last 100 years, which scares me. So knob and tube is kind of a big problem. Home inspector should be identifying it. We do see it in some houses and it's not active. A home inspector should be telling you that. If they find it and it's not energized, we have little sensors that we can put next to the wire. They should be kind of selling you off on that, saying, hey, I see it. It was here at one point. All my outlets are grounded. My lights are grounded. I don't see anywhere it's active. I think we're okay. It all got replaced because we can identify those things for the most part. This was interesting to me. This was my inspection. You see the wire going into the downspout. I really didn't understand that. I never did figure out why. I believe they were running wires out the downspout leader to lights in the yard. Electricity and water do not mix well. So I didn't really care for that. I thought that was just craziness. I don't know who would possibly do that, but that's what we see all the time. Things get done. Plumbing. there's a ton of plumbing problems. I got to say, most buyers are not freaked out too much by plumbing problems. Unless, of course, you turn on the hot water and the temperature gauge reads 209 degrees. Now, I don't remember science class back in the day, but they tell me water boils at 212 degrees at sea level. So that's only a couple of degrees away from actually boiling water coming out of the thing. You can get scalded with 130-degree water. So yeah, that was pretty scary. That was on a steam boiler system that had a summer-winter hookup. It's an old school type of hookup. And there was obviously a malfunction there that needed to be addressed. But those are the kind of things we see with plumbing problems. Don't really care for them. But most plumbing problems are pretty easily fixed. Unless, of course, you've got a cast iron drain line running through the crawl space, which is completely corroded. And that's toilet paper hanging out there. So this is the kind of stuff you see in a crawl space. This is why your home inspector needs to go into the crawl space. This was not readily visible from the entrance of the crawl space. That was on this inspection. So, you know, these things are found out during your access to the crawl space. The other thing I'm going to say is we've gotten a lot more bullish on cast iron, old cast iron. Cast iron has about a 75 to maybe 100 on a good day year life expectancy. A lot of the cast iron that we see anymore is pushing that life expectancy. So more and more we're starting to push for scoping the pipes if they're cast iron, particularly if there's trees in the way. But just as an agent, be aware that if you're seeing cast iron pipes, then a little buzzer should go off in your head that there may be some cast iron issues. Again, these are kind of like the evolution of things in housing, you know, that we're going to see it. Now, Philadelphia has a really strict plumbing code. They require still a lot of cast iron to be installed. Obviously, if it's installed in the last 10 or 20 years, it's probably going to be fine. It's just that older house, that 75, 125-year-old house that has cast iron that we're, you know, somewhat more concerned about. My question was, how long has this been like this? And why didn't somebody go, hey, that really smells every time I flush my toilet? I sat in a class one time. Now, I wasn't a really good student, I got to say. But somewhere they told me this stalactites take like thousands of years to grow an inch. I disproved that. I got a stalactite and a stalagmite here. They're on a drain to a shower. And I believe that the reason that grew so quickly, because this house was only about 40 years old, was that there was soap involved. So I think that the soap actually contributed to it. But that, again, this is up in look at where I'm at. I'm in a crawl space. This is back in no man's land where you can't see. I don't do it anymore, except I train my own guys, obviously, but I used to train home inspectors for the industry. And I would go crawling into a crawl space. Now I'm an old man and rickety and overweight, and I still got in those crawl spaces. And I'd look back and those guys were, you know, standing there looking at me, and I'm like, what's the matter? He goes, well, you know, I'm watching you do the crawl space. I'm like, get your butt in here. You need to get in here. You cannot ignore the crawl space. Get in the dang crawl space, because this is the stuff we find. So plumbing problems, this was not a big fix. There are issues with older shower pans, older houses that are 50 plus years old that have the old lead shower pans behind tile can be problematic. But that's usually pretty visible if we can get underneath of them. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing good. All right, so the deck problems. Decks are really kind of a thing unto themselves. When they're this low to the ground, I don't really get too excited about them. They don't bother me because they're not really going anywhere. When they're 10, 15, 20 feet in the air, obviously I get a bit more concerned that the deck is an issue. This is a car jack that was put under there. Your home inspector should spend a significant amount of time looking at the deck, making sure the fasteners are there. I had one in Philly years ago that had fasteners that when I got the suspicion that they weren't right, I went to pry them out and they had just taken bolts and cut them off and stuck them in the holes. And the only thing holding up that whole deck was nails, which is not allowed. So deck problems are a big issue. Some of the biggest lawsuits in our industry relate to people falling off of decks and decks collapsing, rails collapsing, stuff like that. So we want to be really particular about about deck inspections. Roofs are, this is a bad roof, right? Now, unfortunately, in my business, I get a lot of other inspectors' reports to look at to say, hey, Bill, they're saying it needs a roof and I don't have any problems with the roof and, you know, whatnot. So we're contacted, as Matt said, a lot of what I do every day is deal with lawyers and builders. I work both sides of the field. I work for builders, I work against builders in legal actions, and I represent home inspectors in actions against them. So I get the opportunity, more so than most, to look at other people's reports and look at situations that have arisen and problems. And part of what you saw today is a result of that data, that experience. But a lot of times I think roofs get replaced ahead of time. This roof needs to be replaced, let's make no mistake about it. But most roofs leak at the penetrations first, so where the pipes come through. That's if you get a little stain around the bathroom or one of the bedrooms on the ceiling, it's probably that pipe vent collar. But the problem is that if you ask a roofer if you need a new roof, they don't even need to come and look at it. The answer is yes, you need a new roof. So I want to be a little careful. I think that one thing that home inspectors should be doing more of, and we try to do it, is help people with a third or second opinion. We're unbiased. We don't do any work. My wife will tell you that. I do nothing. But we don't go out and put roofs on. We're not trying to sell you anything. So before you go spend a ton of money on something, why not have a home inspector come out and look at it and give you their opinion about whether or not you actually need all this, or if there's something less sinister involved. Because I do think roofing is one of those things that tends to, it should really, most roofs today should have a 30 to 50 year life cycle on an asphalt roof. Metal about 100, slate many hundreds, and wood, if you get the cedar treated periodically, it can last 30 or 40 years. If you don't get it treated, especially if there's trees around, it may only make it 15 or 20, which is ridiculous because cedar roofs are seriously expensive. You got to take care of cedar roofs. This wasn't my inspection, it was next door. I thought it was a great picture though. This is what happens when you don't take care of your roof, it collapses. This is why you need to get a visual of the roof. Now, I got to tell you, most inspectors, there's some cap shingles missing there. We have gotten a lot more tentative about getting on really seriously steep or scary roofs. We have drones. Every guy has a drone in my company. Most inspectors nowadays have one. But I do believe you need to be able to get that perspective. You need to be able to get above the roof, whether you're walking on it or flying over it, to see what's happening at the tops of the chimneys and all. Obviously, if the roof is accessible and it's not super steep, I want my guys to walk them anyway. Our limit on that is, not that you know, but it's a 7 to 12 pitch. Above a 7-12 is a little too steep, and we've got other tools to do that, so we can get it. But getting that shot of the roof, inspecting a roof solely from the ground is our last option. First option is obviously to walk it. Second option would be to fly a drone over it and get the shots. Sometimes if you're near the airport in Philadelphia, you can't fly. It's a no-fly zone. So there are some places where we can't fly the drone even. Then we may have to use binoculars and see it from the ground. But that's rare. I can tell you that probably that only happens once or twice a year in my company, at least. Inspectors. I started writing the not so great inspector, and I just realized it was the reverse of everything I wrote about the great inspector. So I just figured we'll go over that. Inspectors should, its home inspection process should really be a calming event, not an adversarial or exciting event. When my guys are leaning against the counter with their hands in their pockets, talking shop to the buyer, I figure we got it handled. When they're running around like a crazy person, sweating, I'm more concerned about it. I want that process to be calm. We already have enough emotions. You guys are in the real estate business. You see this happen day in and day out. The buyer is on pins and needles. They, especially in this market, they probably paid 20 or 30 or 50, and we've had 150,000 over asking to get the house. They're going crazy. The home inspector should not be adding to that anxiety. They should be reducing that anxiety. So remain calm. You should connect with the buyer. Honestly, I tell all my guys, I've told them for years, I tell everybody I've ever trained, everybody I've ever talked to, I do some educational stuff for home inspectors. The house is the easiest part of our job. Quite frankly, it's simple. Any good home inspector should be able to inspect the house with one eye closed and one arm tied behind their back. It's not difficult. There's heaters, foundations, roofs. It's not the hard part. The hard part is the people. People are always going to be the biggest challenge in our industry. You know, when you sit down to do a contract, it's not hard, but doing the contract so that it doesn't piss off the seller, doesn't put your buyer in an unsavory position, that becomes the art of it. The art of the home inspection is connecting with the buyer, calming them down, walking them through the process, allowing them the possibility to learn about their house and understand what it is they're buying. A good home inspector is going to solicit questions. You know, we want the person with us. Most home inspectors that are any good do. You want the person other than on the roof and in the attic. I want that person sitting right next to me or standing right next to me, asking me lots of questions. The more questions they ask, I find the less problems I have going forward. A home inspector should explain how things work. Now, that explanation should not be at an engineer level or at a crazy level. It should be fundamental. It should be basic unless the client asks for more. When we get into some of these complex systems, such as ground source heat pumps in general, generators, things like that with transfer switches, they may need a little bit more information so that they can get comfortable about it. Or if they have a particular expertise, they may want to know more about something. And any good home inspector should be able to take that to whatever level. But for the most part, I just want people to understand that the heater does what it does. It heats the air, cools the air. It needs to be serviced annually at least. How to change the filter. They should show them how to change the filter in their heating system. We don't need to have a heating guy come out to change a filter. There's a lot of good tools now where filters get delivered on a routine basis. When the filter shows up, go down and change it. We should, again, be calm, take our time. A home inspection should take 2 hours minimum. Obviously, bigger, older houses could take longer, but taking their time allows the client to calm down and they don't feel rushed. We should discuss the life expectancy of things, heaters, roofs, water heaters, things like that, so that they understand when they buy a house with a 5-year-old water heater that in about 5 years, they're going to need another one. And it doesn't become a surprise to them. I think truly, I said this before, I think good home inspectors that are capable should offer potential solutions to the problem. Not that they're going to solve it, but the last thing I want to do is send my client out of there with 100,000 different things that they don't know if it's a $500 problem or a $10,000 problem. They don't know what the solution is going to be. But the bigger problems in that house should be discussed, that this is what is likely going to happen or need to happen to fix it. It's happy to follow up after the inspection. I think this is one of the most annoying things. Again, I know a lot of home inspectors, do a lot of conferences, and some inspectors just don't want to be bothered. They do their inspection, they charge their money, and they walk out. I think a good home inspector becomes a resource for you, for your buyer, happy to answer questions about the inspection process. If they get the report, they got any problems, we want to talk to them. And he's happy to follow up and answer questions. And we say at the inspection, and again, a good home inspector is going to do the same thing. Your question line is indefinite. You call me 6 years from now. I just got a guy email the other day that was years ago. We did his inspection, and I'm happy to have that contact. I want to answer those questions for this gentleman. So we want to be able to have we want your client to understand that they have that resource going forward almost indefinitely. I think well dressed is important. Showing up, in torn jeans and ratty shirts, it doesn't make a good freshman. We need to make you look like a pro for recommending us or them, your inspector. He's got the tools to do the job. But when your client comes to you after the inspection, goes, "That was amazing. I'm really impressed with that," then you feel good. And if you don't feel good, then that's a problem. So a good home inspector is going to do all those things. The bad home inspector does none of those things. Age of house is really important. We're going to push a little bit here. The older homes create more problems. You can go back and look at this, but basically anything built before the 30s is really challenging. Homes built in the 40s and 50s are less challenging, but still can have some issues. Most of the stuff built after the 1950s or 60s are, you know, they're pretty solid, possible lead-based paint. But you know, but the issues become more what was done to the house after it was built, as the people lived in it. Strategies. So you got an inspector. I want to cover. This is probably one of the more important slides. So we're running out of time here, but if you've got an inspector that's off the rails, that you're at the inspection, which you should be attending your inspections, and the inspector's saying things that you don't agree with, or the inspector's got the client upset, it's not a good idea to challenge the inspector's diagnosis of something, because that puts you in an unusual position. And there's been some pretty heavy lawsuits with the agent contradicted the inspector, and it turned out the inspector was right. However, you can ask the inspector certain questions and leading questions somewhere. So if the inspector is saying this is a real problem, you're looking at it, you agree it's a problem, but it's not a huge problem, just ask them, can, you know, Mr. Inspector, can this be repaired? And the answer to that is yes, everything can be repaired. So getting him to admit it can be repaired, and then you can maybe lead in with, well, do you think it's a big, you know, a $500 repair or a $10,000 repair? So you can kind of help your client get more information out of an inspector that's not doing his job. If you view an inspector as novel, you could ask him for a cost. Ask if he sees this problem often. I got to tell you that 90% of what we see a lot. So having him admit to your client that he sees this all the time also puts your client at ease to say, hey, look, I get it, it's bad, but I see it all the time. If your client's truly getting uncomfortable, ask the inspector to slow down and go over the client's concerns. Intercede for your client. Be an activist for your client. Get the inspector to do the right thing and slow down and cover that. Most inspectors are free and happy to do that. Ask your buyer, assure your buyer you'll do your best to address their concerns. Once they get the report in hand, obviously you've got some work to do, but you know, you're the guide for that. We're not going to tell you, you're not going to tell your client that you're going to go negotiate this. That's your job to figure out what you're going to negotiate, because I have no idea what's in your sales contract. Do not downplay the inspector's findings. I said that before. There's been some pretty heavy problems with that. So let the inspector swing on his own noose. If he hangs himself, that's his problem. But you don't want to put yourself in between that and put yourself at risk. Don't hesitate to ask leading questions to help inspector that may not realize his client's checking out. Again, the inspector is usually his head's buried in the inspection. It's easy to get distracted and focused on what it is you're doing and not the client, which is a mistake in my opinion. But if that's happening, then you can ask some leading questions. Mr. Inspector, I see you looking at the heater. Is there anything there that we should know about? Or Mr. Inspector, how often do you see a bad water heater? How long do they typically last? Because this is going to help your client get the information that they need, because you know what a good inspection looks like, because you've been on lots of them. A good inspector should focus at least as much of his client on the client as he does the house, or she does the house. In most cases, I believe it should be a lot more. Like I said, the house is the easy part. I'm going to blow by these, but you can go look at them. There's some really good PAR documents that talk about waiving inspections, and obviously it's my business. We are certainly seeing the impacts of waived inspections in my company. I think my guys are going to start driving for Uber soon, but you know, I think that that's an industry problem. I think that the issue is that how does the client remember why they waived the inspection? Are you liable because you recommended it, or are you making sure they sign a document that says it was their idea, not yours? So when something comes up, it's not a problem. Hank Lerner wrote a thing about, it's all about the inspection, discusses issues with sneaking inspector in a show. We get that call quite frequently. It's problematic. You know, scheduling a showing and then showing up with an inspector is not okay. And then other inspections may show repairs, and that's when the seller gets upset because they said you aren't going to inspect it. But that's not the only, you know, home inspection isn't the only type of inspection. And information only inspections is kind of ironic. But all that stuff is discussed in this article. You got to report, again, let your inspector help you with this. Let your inspector have a conference call with you and client. And it should say the word material defects on the stuff that you're going to focus on. let's see, we got a couple more minutes. The power of pre-listing is, I think, is a huge tool. It's underutilized. The agents that I have that utilize it are some of the top agents in the industry. It limits your liability, which is probably the most important thing it does, and it limits the liability of the seller, because the seller can easily go, look, I had it inspected, go talk to the inspector. It's my job as an inspector, as my company, to assume a lot of the liability for the things that happen. We carry that insurance. We take that under our wing, and we understand that we need to accept that. I've never met a buyer that takes 10 grand for a $10,000 problem. They always want that plus a trip to Disney. And so if we have the pre-listing inspection, we can disclose or manage those problems on our own idea. That's my cell number. That is not for scheduling inspections, please. But if you have a problem, if you've got something you need to run by an inspector, even if you're not my agent, I'm happy to answer questions for you. Shoot me a picture. Send it. Pictures are amazing. Take a picture of it and text it to me and say, hey, Bill, we're walking through this house and I see this, should it be concerned? Remember, most pictures that I see are too close. Stand back. We can zoom in. Cameras today are pretty good, but I'm always available for those to field those kind of questions. You need this resource. And if you've got a great home inspector, then you stay with your great home inspector, because they're few and far between, in my humble opinion. But your inspector should be a fantastic resource for you to help you make you look like a pro, to help answer your questions and get your people to the closing table. I'm always available for sponsoring sales meetings or lunch and learns or whatever you guys call them. We're starting to do more and more of that now, because everybody's kind of starting to get together. I'm excited that we're seeing people face to face. I've been to some events and it was really exciting. All my inspectors are fully vaccinated, just FYI. And I think that's important. That people get nervous about these things. So, and I think that's my time. I'm going to stop.
Right, Bill.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. We got a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
So Garrett said something about stucco. So Garrett, I dropped the video link to Bill's in-depth presentation from a few months ago that was solely focused on stucco. That's a really good watch. You can watch that on your own timeline. Watch a little bit here, watch a little bit there. But please check that out. He gets into everything stucco related.
Website also, spotlighthi.com. We have a whole section, we've got videos on how a test goes. We've got tons of information about why we're talking about it so much these days. I got to say, you're in Philadelphia. You guys are about 5 years behind the suburbs. The problems in Philadelphia behind stucco and veneer stone are substantial. And remember this, it's not stucco. It's what happens behind it. It's how the flashings and house wraps are put on. The stucco is actually a really good product that's been put on for thousands of years. But there's a lot of great information. Again, you have my cell phone numbers. Text me. If you want to have a conversation offline, I'm happy to have the conversation. If you've got a particular problem, again, I feel this is all I do. I don't really do too many inspections anymore. I field questions from agents, buyers, sellers, contractors all day long. So if you want to have a conversation about some particular problem that you're facing, give me a call.
So going back, Bill, you were talking about dehumidifiers. You have one in your house running all the time, and you were talking about you should probably have one of those going in your basement. The question here is, what % do you recommend for dehumidifier?
100%. If it's got a basement or crawl space, 100%. In this market, right? I mean, we're talking about Philadelphia, Northeast, the Northeast market. If you live in Arizona, you probably don't need one. But in this market, 100% of the time, it's just the new ones are adjustable, so they only run when they're needed, so they're not going to consume energy. So you just put it down there, and it's a safety net in case of if it's humid, it's going to work on drying it out. Then the bigger the basement, the bigger the process. So they're rated in quarts. I think if you have a big house, you might need 2, like in excess of 3,000 square feet, and the better ones are 70 quarts. Remember, there's a filter in there that needs to be cleaned once a year or so. But 100% of the time, 100%.
And then going back to, you were talking about roof and the materials used. You were talking about cedar roof and treating and that kind of stuff. So the question is, how do you get a cedar roof treated? What does that mean?
Sure. So Brian Potts owns a company called the Cedar Roof Company. I think personally they're the premier cedar roof company. I like them because they walk onto a cedar roof and don't automatically say it needs to be replaced. They want to salvage the cedar roof if they can. So there's a process about every 7 years or so, 10 maybe, depends on trees, right? Trees are not great for a cedar roof. The moss and stuff that grows on there is really damaging. But about every 7 to 10 years, they come out, they clean the roof, and then they put a treatment on there that helps. It's like a preservative for the cedar roof. And I've been in developments where the cedar roof in this particular house was treated regularly, and it was 30+ years old. And some of the houses in that development were already on their second roof. They were already having a roof replaced, a third time. The original roof that they'd been replaced. So there are, I'm sure, other companies. It's not a do-it-yourself kind of thing, but the Cedar Roof Company, I think, is the premier company in this particular market, and I like Brian's approach to this.
All right, we're going to wrap up with one last question, Bill, and it is, do you do structural inspections?
I'm not a structural engineer. However, I do think any good home inspector should be able to look at a problem and understand whether you need one or not. So I'm not a structural engineer. None of my guys are structural engineers, but I think that it's a lot less expensive and a lot less problematic to have a good home inspector come in and look at a problem and say, this is serious. This is not serious. Now, I do believe there's a lot of home inspectors that run scared out there and call for a structural engineer every other time they see something. I will tell you that less than 10 times, we do thousands of inspections a year, and less than 10 times a year do we call for a structural engineer. More often than not, it's something that can be addressed by a good framing contractor or a good foundation contractor. But yes, there are times when you need a structural engineer, but I think a good stopgap measure on a good home inspection, a home inspector should be able to give you guidance on that. But no, we don't do specific structural inspections. If you send me a picture of something, I'll try to figure out if you need a structural engineer or not. Yeah, I can. So there's a couple engineers that I like. Depends on what you're looking for. So there's some soil engineers that I work with. So a lot of what I do has to do, I'm looking up the number right now. But generally speaking, structural engineers, Russ Daniels is one.
Really put Bill on the spot here.
No, I've got a lot of them. The problem is they're all so stinking busy that it's hard to get them. Like Dan Honing is a great engineer, a friend of mine. But if I call Dan Honing tomorrow and said, Dan, I need you to come out and look at something, he'd be like, I can't really do it. Because they're all going crazy. I'm trying to find Mark Reinmeller. He's probably the one that's going to be the most readily available. Mark Reinmeller, his number is 215-361-8570. And again, if you text me and ask me for that, I can send it to you. I can send you others. I have a lot of them, but Reinmeller is probably the most. He's a home inspector too, and he's probably one of the more home inspector friendly kind of guys that you can get out there.
All right. On that note, we hit some pretty scary topics today: mold, bats, petrified dehydrated squirrels, stalagmites, stalactites. We went to Crystal Cave, I think. But Bill, awesome job. Thanks for that presentation. Thanks to all of you for tuning in today. Great questions, great engagement. And we hope to see you guys all next week on those coffee talks. Until then, happy Halloween. Have a great weekend. Take care, everyone.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.